Welcome everyone to the FDOT Traffic Plan Series webinar. We're talking about Chapter 5, the Design Tools. In this chapter, basically, it has the main tools that are used commonly across all of the different disciplines within traffic plans. Those tools include Design and Computation Manager, so we'll take a look at the different modes and the functionality within the DNC. We will look at the GeoPack 3PC Ad Hoc Attribute Manager, the FDOT Ad Hoc Attribute Manager, Draw Cell by Feature, and Draw Cell Group by Feature. Like I said, these are all tools that are commonly used by just about everybody. The first tool that I want to talk about is the DNC Manager. There's several different ways that I can get to the DNC. I can go to GeoPack Road and then Design and Computation Manager. We have the Road Toolbox, which is GeoPack Road Tools. Okay, you can get this toolbox and it is the main icon here. I can also go to my tasks, go to the FDOT Plans Development Tasks, and quantities, and there is another icon here for DNC Manager. So looking at this tool, I'm going to open this up just a tad, close it. The DNC Manager is a tool that has been set up. We have a tool, and I'll go ahead and just open up the one that you can see. It's in the FDOT directory. If you have a DNC Manager database, which is highly recommended, in your project folder with your project number, so it matches the project directory folder, then it will open that database for you when you're in the DOT workspace. But if you go to the SS4 directory, GeoPack databases, this is where it resides. I'm going to open that up. Okay, so this is the database that has been developed by the CAD office for our designers to use. It is set up with categories, which are the yellow folders, and the way that we've used the categories is to set them up by discipline. So for the most part, so I've got right-of-way. There's not a lot of structures. These are things mostly that would be used for a roadway type project. We have roadway design, drainage, utilities. But down here, there's a traffic plan. So we have signalization, we have signing, we have pavement markings, ITS, which is a sister to the signalization, and highway lighting. Okay, so these are the ones that we're focusing on with the traffic plans manual. For today, I'm just going to pick the pavement markings. So within here are the different categories that are set up by the type of material. And I'll just show you lighting is another example. It's set up by what am I looking for? Poles, luminaires, load centers. Signing and signalization are the same way. We tried to group like items together within each one. So if I'm looking at thermoplastic, everything that I need for thermoplastic is in here. And within each one of the categories, okay, which we've used for the organization, finally we get down into the items. So each of these are called items. So we have categories and items. We have 3 different types of items that we use in this database. The ones with the little, looks like a piece of paper, those are default items. They're pretty basic. Don't say a whole lot. It does set up the symbology and a few other things, some design key-ins, what happens whenever I double click in a certain mode. That type of information is stored in here, as well as the main symbology for the particular item. Okay. The other type is these with the calculators. And for most of the traffic plans, those are mainly the 2 types that we use, that default and the calculator. The difference between these two is that there is a compute method that I can set within this item type that allows me to calculate based on either an area, a line, an element. There's a lot of different options that I have, but it's set up so that it will calculate and tells it how do I want to calculate this item. Okay. So when you're inside of the D&C Manager, something important to remember is that when you're coming through, it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, pay attention to which type of item that you use. If it's a default item, it's typically there in order to place the element or whatever the feature is within your design file, and then the ones with the calculator are the ones that are used in order to calculate the item. If you don't see a combination of the two, you can use the calculator items in order to draw. There is a set of menus at the top, as well as some icons that are below the menus. Pretty basic as far as the menus go. I've got the file, basic things like open, close, save as. We can merge DDBs together, not something that you will most likely ever do unless you become a D&C guru. Compressing the design or the database. Sometimes if the database starts to act a little weirdly, it doesn't hurt to compress the database. But for the most part, if you need to open up a different database, a project-specific one, you can do that. You can save any changes that you may make to a project-specific database, as well as saving it out as a new file. Okay, so those are the file options. Edit, I can copy, move, delete, rename categories and items. I can go and use the find. The find lets me go in and search the database. I can search by an item name. I can search by a description. So, and whichever directory or category you're in is where it'll start. When it goes from there to the bottom, if it doesn't find it, it'll ask if you want it to start back at the top. Okay, but I can search for different things, and that can make things faster if you're not familiar with the setup within the D&C. Also, underneath Edit is the Identify. Some of these are also in other options, but the Identify allows me to identify an element that is in my design, and when I do, it tells me, okay, this one happens to be the standard thermo open grade white 6-inch solid. Okay, so it's a quick way of going, well, I need to draw this in here, I need to set it up so that I'm using the same one, or maybe I've come back in later and I just want to calculate something. Quickest way to get there would be to use the ID button. There are some settings that we can take a look at. I think the most critical ones to really understand and know the design, this one is important because when it does calculations and custom line style creation, I can set up these parameters in here. Understand that every time I come back into the D&C Manager, these will be reset to the default. For example, I know that the tolerances get reset. Custom line style scales, it overrides what's going on in your file so that if I need to create something at a different scale, I can do that. So just know that that's where this is. It's under Settings, Design Settings. All right, something else that is critical is under the Compute. And this I'm just making you aware of what this parameter is, and this is the DBMS properties. DBMS is basically what they call the option to take it from when you create your quantities, and if you take it out to the Quantity Manager database, that is called DBMS. I wouldn't change any of these settings, but just to make everyone aware, there is an option in here for purge quantities for deleted DGN elements, and I've known people to like to use this option, or they think it's a pretty good option. That can be good and can be bad. basically what that does is that if I change the element, for example, say this turn lane changed, I went in here, I deleted these elements, and then I redraw them back in, it will delete those quantities that it had previously and then add back in the new ones, which sounds really good, except when you bring that information over with this turned on, you have to calculate everything that's in your database, which is the Quantity Manager database, at the same time. If you do not, it will say all I did was the 6-inch white is all that I recalculated and exported over into Quantity Manager. With this option on, if I have any other quantities in that database, it will delete them. So this is just a precaution. Go ahead and let you know, because some people like to play in the figure out what all the different settings do. This one you don't want to mess with. Leave this turned off. I think that in our workflows that it is better not to use that. Later on in 9, or I think it's 10, we talk about quantities. So creating quantities will be more in depth in that chapter. Some of these other ones, like adding to favorites, I have that in another chapter as well. Okay, so let's take a look at these icons here. I have 2 different modes to the Design and Computation Manager. It has the dialog, which is what you see now. It also has what they call a toolbox mode. And when I click on it, it changes into a toolbox, which I can dock anywhere I want to. The way that it works is that you navigate and you get to whichever category that I want, and then in the first one here, and then whatever is available in that category is what I see in the second drop down. So then I can go in and pick a different item. These two go up and down levels. This is the option to bring up the find, bring up the ID that we talked about. Some of the rest of these, basically they're setting the different modes, executing key-ins, because I can't double click on items from here. But this is the toolbox mode, and the one on the end down here is the switch back to the dialog mode. One of the key things that I want to point out here is that this little checkbox at the beginning is the option for place influence. Whenever I'm working, sometimes if I know I'm using the same items or the same group of items, you can put it to toolbox mode, push it out of your way, it gives you more real estate, but I can very quickly see with this toolbox if I have place influence turned on or not. Let me switch it back to the dialog mode. So we've talked about the identify items, so I could have gone to edit. I can also go to the icon and identify items, and it will take me to that item within the database. I have the next one over is the display. Display gives me, and sometimes you have to move the toolbox around in order to actually see what's going on in here. It splits the bottom half of the dialog so that I have all the items that I can navigate at the top, and then there's a collection set area at the bottom. Okay, so the display mode uses the collection, so I could put more than one item in. And you ask, how do you do that? Okay, so maybe I want the arrows. I can right click and tell it to add it to the collection. And maybe I want the 6-inch white. I can add it to collection. So it's just a right click option. And it adds and it creates a list. Okay, so this can come from anywhere within the database. And the display mode, what it does with this collection set is it allows me to change what I see. So I can use the highlight selection, and notice that it highlighted all of my 6-inch white as well as my arrows. Okay, you can see them lit up. It will hide those, so I turn off the display, so now they're gone, or I can invert that and I only see what I have in my collection set. I have found the display to be a really good help as far as going back in and making sure that I've got everything, especially in this mode, that I have everything tagged so that the Design and Computation Manager will see it. It's a visual cue that I've tagged it correctly so that when I do my computations, everything is there. Let's put that back to normal. So those are the display mode. Each one of these as I go across is considered a different quote-unquote mode. Okay, so that's display. The second one over, the little pencil drawing here, this is the design mode. From here, this is where it uses the items to place, it sets the symbology. When I toggle on place influence, notice up here at the top, right now it's set to the default level. As soon as I turn on place influence, whatever has been defined for that particular item, it becomes my active level symbology. So when I'm trying to design and I'm using the DNC, I want to make sure I turn on place influence so that later when I go to calculate, it will recognize these items. There is what they call a GeoPack tag that the DNC places on the items that are set up within the database, and they're unique per item, that allows DNC to basically gives it some more intelligence to the elements so that it can recognize those elements and know it belongs to whichever item I'm selecting. Really good example I can think off the top of my head is like curb and gutter. We only have one level for curb, but there's half a dozen different types of curb, and those tags allows it to differentiate between what looks to be identical in MicroStation really is different and can calculate those things separately. There is another option here. It doesn't get used by traffic plans very often. That's this draw COGO element. That basically it reads your GPK file. Okay, so that is our design mode. Like I said, we use this mode for drawing our elements into the design file. The next mode is the set. And the set mode allows me to take any element that I've drawn. So for example, let me go draw a line. This line is on the default level. It allows me to go in and set any of my elements that were drawn using just MicroStation tools. It can be all on the right levels, but like I said, it doesn't have that GeoPack tag that I get with place influence. If someone comes in here and draws everything in on the right levels, but did not use DNC with place influence, then DNC Manager won't recognize these. The set command can be used in order to set that information. I'll talk about ad hocs a little bit more here in a few minutes. One of the things in the set option to remember is this attach mode, whether I want to append or replace. Append adds ad hocs to the list, so it looks what ad hocs do I have on the list to set from this item, and it adds anything to it that doesn't exist. If it already exists, it doesn't change it. Okay, just that's one of the big things that I think gets confused sometimes, is that, well, I've added this on here, it should have replaced the one that was there, and no, it doesn't. So we want to make sure that if we're trying to modify any of the ad hocs that we have going on, that I use the replace option. Replace takes any ad hocs that are on an element, deletes them all, and replaces them with the values that I have from the DNC Manager. Siding and pavement marking has ad hocs all over the place, even though you don't necessarily see them. So it's important that if you are setting things, that you do turn on this ad hoc attributes option so that things will be quantified like they should be later on down the road. Okay, so in this instance, I have some 6-inch white. This was set to default. If I tell it to set, I can then select it. I can also create a MicroStation selection set and set an entire selection set all at one time. I don't have to do it by element. All right, so now if I look at this line, that now that I've set it, there we go. So now instead of default, it's on the PM stripe. That is the set option. The compute option, this one will be, like I said, talked about much later in this webinar series. I think, like I said, chapter 10, with the quantities. It gets in depth into how the items are set up for computation, as well as how to go through creating, setting up your dialog for getting your computations. But just know that that's what this mode is right here. The next mode is shape, starting with SS3 and now SS4. We do not use the shape mode. It acts kind of squirrely with civil features. Even if it's just referenced in from a design file, it still sees that information, and it can give you odd results. About the only thing that you would use I can think of with traffic plans for creating shapes for areas is your island nose paint. The next mode is the pavement marking, and again, this will get covered in chapter 6, all these different modes, but there's special tools that are in the DNC Manager that are used for creating our pavement markings. There's a striping tool, a separation tool, a chevron diverge, and chevron merge. So I have these different tools to help me to generate my pavement markings within my plans using the DNC. And last but not least is the preferences mode. This mode is used whenever you want to go in and start making changes, you want to customize a database. This is a good mode to have because when I double click on things, it's not activating keyends. It's simply opening up the items for modify. And it also gives me the options for creating new categories, new items, and modifying and reviewing the items. So let me go back to the design mode and just show you also that within each of these I also have right-click options, whether it's on a category or if it's on an element. But I have right-click options that allow me to copy, move. I can, if it's an item, I can look at that item information. For example, if I want to review this item, it'll pop this up so that I can see it is a compute parameter type item. We use the drafting standards default and compute parameters. Drafting standards I didn't mention, but they basically just have drafting standards. The difference is they don't have the compute parameters down here, but it does have a section so that if I needed to set up elements that have different properties and other different symbologies, I can set all of that up. If I needed to show an arc differently from a line, or if I've got profile, or I think there's profile, there's the plan view, there's alignments, so that I can change my center line information. All of that can be set up within one of the drafting items. So this is basically one of the things that I've been talking about, is it sets all of my level symbology. So that information is here under this placement. So we've already set all of these items up so that they meet the CAD standards for what you're trying to draw. It has an attribute, and this is the Geopack attribute that I was speaking of, that has been set up so that it makes those elements that I draw unique, so that when I do calculate them, that I'm getting the correct elements for my calculations. It sets up whether it's primary or construction. So those are important. If these are not exactly the same, then it does not recognize the element as belonging to this item. Some things have supplemental search where I can say, okay, for instance, the rumble striping, I have some left and right patterns or custom line styles. So when I go to calculate those, I can tell it go find the ones on the left and the ones on the right, and I can do that with levels. That's what the supplemental search does, and these keyends, depending on whether or not which mode I'm in, these are keyends that get activated. So If you get into using the DNC and you want to customize, you may want to come in here and take a look at these key-ins that are here. So if I'm in the design mode and I double click on an item, this design key-in gets activated, and this is where it's been set up. Last but not least here is the ad hoc attributes. The ad hoc attributes get set by our office. They can be set up for all kinds of things. They can be as part of, I may have a variable sitting in here that may be used in formula. For the traffic plan discipline, most of the time, the only thing that you're going to see in here is whenever we attach ad hocs for computation. There's 3 different types: the unit, the string, and the quantity. And just as far as I'll go, because like I said, it'll be covered in more detail in Chapter 10. But basically, ad hocs are just extra information that is added to an element that can then be picked up later and used by other tools that gives extra information that we need about a given element drawn in the file. I always recommend that when you start a project, you want to go to File, or actually want to do a Save As, New File, and save it out to your SYMB directory on your project. It may be that sometimes you may wind up having more than one sitting out here. If that's the case, it will be remembered by your resources. So if Roadway already has one out here, you can put it in the signing directory. So if you've got more than one discipline accessing the same project directory at the same time, and it's different groups, then you can put this in your signing directory, but just make sure that it is with your project. Save it locally. That way, if you come in here and make any changes at all, it stays with the project and goes with the project, so that anyone else within the life of this project wants to go back in and duplicate what you've done, it's all there and they can do that. And I already have one sitting out here. Let me replace it. I'll just say yes. Okay. Once I've saved it, you'll notice if I come up here, it didn't change the database that I'm in. I actually have to go to a File, Open, and then navigate to my project directory in order to open it back up. And SYMB, let me grab that. Doesn't take long, and then like I said, once it's open, if it's in the SYMB directory, it'll always get picked up whether your resources are deleted or not, so that I can open it. Otherwise, you have the option to put it in the signing directory, and as long as the resources are not deleted, when you open up the DNC, it'll open up to the same project database. That's the basics for using the Design and Computation Manager. Now, I talked about ad hocs, and we have ad hocs on our elements. As I mentioned, if you're in the DNC, you can use the set mode in order to place ad hocs on my elements. In the design mode, I can, as I go, it places them as long as I have place influence turned on, but I can't ever go back and see what is actually on this element from the DNC manager. So in other words, I've assigned it in an earlier session of MicroStation, this element sitting in here in the file. I have no idea what these ad hocs are. I'm going to talk about 2 different tools. One I'll go into depth, the other one I'm just going to mention, that allows me to review, modify, and set ad hocs onto my elements outside of the DNC manager. The first one that I want to talk about is the Geopack 3PC Ad Hoc Attribute Manager. If I go to Geopack Road, it's on the Road Tools toolbox. It's also here on the Road menu, 3PC Ad Hoc Attribute Manager. I can get to it from, I click and hold on the Project Manager icon. It's sitting here for me to open from the toolbox. It is also under the Quantities menu for the FDOT Plans Development. and it's that the second icon here, Open Ad Hoc Manager. Okay, and this is the one provided by Geopack. It's a pretty simple tool to use. One thing that I'm going to go ahead and mention is the preferences. Be aware that the preferences out here, it has a set mode, just like the DNC Manager did. Make sure that you go in, and if I need to update ad hoc values, that I've set this to the replace mode. Because if you try to modify something and you're in the append mode, it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to change that value. There is a display attribute filter, but it's more advanced, so I'm not going to get into that here. You can go to the Geopack help files to find more information on it, or you can give one of us a call here in the CAD office. The second option here is the identify element, and what that allows me to do is to select either a single element or a group of elements using a MicroStation selection set and tell me, and it gathers all those ad hocs. Now, it's not gathering anything else but the ad hoc information. So it's not telling me the symbology, it's not telling me the Geopack attribute, it's just telling me what the ad hocs are. Okay, so I then have that information here. I can modify this information if I needed to, or I can add another ad hoc if I wanted to, just by clicking new. Okay, and I'll just make this one a test, and we'll make it a string. And so I can make changes, I can add ad hocs, I can delete ad hocs. Okay, I have it in the replace mode, so whatever I do here is what's going to wind up on an element. Okay, so the first thing I do is identify the element. The second thing that you're going to do is set the element attributes. When I click set, it's going to ask me to identify the element that I want to set. Okay, so I'm going to select it and then accept that selection. Now if I go back and I hit identify, it's going to clear because it's looking for a new element, and then it'll accept it. And notice that now it sees it as having this on here. Another thing, if you didn't catch it, is that when I have the Ad Hoc Attribute Manager open, it gives me the extra information when I hover over elements within my file so that I can see what ad hocs that I have and what those values are. As soon as I shut this tool down, I lose that functionality. So that's another thing that with the Geopack Attribute Manager, it's kind of like an extra bonus, is being able to see that information. I can select multiple elements, so let me just grab a group. And I'm going to create a collection set, and I'm just going to grab all of those right there, and I'm going to tell it to open those up. Okay, and notice now it says I have 1 of 4. Okay, so I can make, and I need to pay attention to what is up here. Okay, when I take a selection set and I identify them, and it basically grabs all of that information, puts it into the dialog box, and I can navigate through each one of these elements. Okay, and it's a good way to double check what's on these elements. Okay, the display function, I have never seen it work. It's supposed to highlight and display each as you scroll through, but it doesn't. Can't tell you why on that one, but as you go through here, if I try to make changes at this point, it won't work. When you see these are solid and not ghosted and you have a group within here, this becomes basically like a read-only mode. Okay, so the workflow when I'm talking about a group is to clear it, grab just one to populate the dialog box, make the changes that you need. Okay, so test, I can just put 50. Okay, make the changes that you need to any of the ad hocs, additions, deletions, whatever it may be, okay? Then create your selection set. I'm going to grab all of those, and then click on Set Attributes. It will ask you if you want to do it over a collection or over a selection set. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. It's set them now. Notice that I still have the MicroStation selection set. As soon as I'm done doing that, I can then click the Information or Identify Element button again, and it's going to populate that information, and I can scroll through each one of them. Okay. It becomes read-only again until I clear it and these become ghosted. That's been a frustration with some folks in the past, and I just wanted to make sure that was explained. Hopefully that was explained clearly. If you have questions or issues trying to get that to work, please give me a call. I'll be happy to walk you through it. Okay, so that is it in a nutshell for the Geopack Attribute Manager. I'm just going to bring up and just mention this other one. We do have an ad hoc attribute manager that is on the actions menu. This is not the same. It is a tool that was developed a long time ago, because if you had the slimmed down version of Geopack, which they don't even do anymore, these would, you didn't have access to the 3PC ad hoc attribute manager. But this is still available if anybody would like to use it. There is documentation within the chapter in the manual, but due to time, I'm just not going to get into this tool. So we've talked about the DNC, we've talked about ad hocs, which are really important. We've talked about how can I modify ad hocs and review them and see them. The other two tools that I want to cover today are the Draw Cell by Feature tools. We have two of them. They are Geopack tools. I can get to them from the Plans Preparation group on the toolbox. So I have Draw Cell by Feature, Draw Cell Group by Feature. So I can, either one of these are very beneficial, helpful for traffic plans. I can also get to those from the Geopack Road, Plans Preparation, Draw Cell by Feature, and Draw Cell Group by Feature. I'll look at the Draw Cell by Feature first. And when it mentions feature, notice it popped up the DNC Manager first and then it disappeared. These tools, when they say feature, they're talking about the features or items that are set up within the Design and Computation Manager. So it's using that in the background. Draw Cell by Feature allows me to place a single cell in the design. I can select the feature that I want. If this is not what I'm looking at, which is definitely not, then I can go and I can browse. It allows me to take a look at what I've got. Okay, so I can select anything in here. So say I want to go in and I want to place an arrow, just a single arrow. I can come in here and select it, but know that even though I select, in this case it was a dual turn, okay, that's not what comes up here. Basically, the browse option is allowing me to pick a category, and then it shows me in the drop down everything in that category. And it defaults to the first one. So if I want to use a dual turn, then I need to make sure I go back and select it. I can place them by point or on an element. A lot of times we'll use the on element because that allows me to select a design element or a chain. And if I select chain, I have an option of using my baselines that are in the GPK file. So I can do it that way. So if I know a pole needs to be at a given station and offset, then I can place that pole cell, grab whichever alignment that it is. I can place it at the station, and let's say we're at station 703. meant to hit 3, not 6. And I can tell it an offset, and let's just put this, 45 feet, just so that it just places it somewhere out here. And I can tell it I want to dynamically rotate it, or it will put it out there at the given angle that you tell it, and either an absolute or relative. Absolute is to the design plane, relative is to the element or the DGN or alignment that you select. Tell it to draw. Why is it not? Oh, I didn't lock them. That's why. Let's try that again. Got to lock these things. Now tell it to draw. And notice it's locked. And it's placing it out there, but you've got the data point to accept it. So it can be to the left or the right, even though I put it as a positive value, which would put it over here. Once you say, okay, this is where I want to put it, you data point in the file, and it's there. Now, obviously, that's not where I would put that. But again, I just want to show you how does the tool work. So that's placing a single element at a time. Okay. Well, let's take, for instance, I've got all of these cells that I need to place. Okay. They are, according to the design file, they have a certain distance that they have to be from the stop bar. There's a certain distance from the end of this solid turn lane, solid marking for the turn lane. And I can't remember, I always get them backwards. One of them is 25 feet, the other one's 15. I think it's 15 here. And then they're equidistant in between depending on how long this turn lane is. Okay. That can be done by hand, but it's a little tedious. There's another tool out there. It is Draw Cell Group by Feature. And we close that one. Let's take a look at that one. Road, Draw Cell by Group. Plants. Okay, that's the second one there. All right. Draw Cell Group by Feature allows me to place up to 3 cells at one time together as a group, and then place it at intervals, whether it's a single or group of cells at intervals along an alignment or a DGN file, or an alignment from a GPK or a DGN element. Okay. So it has 2 tabs. The first is the feature group. By default, it's the one in the middle that you're setting up. I can select which one that I want to, which category that I want. Okay, and I can select which arrow. And again, it's defaulting. Okay, so these are left turn lanes. Okay, so I want to place a left turn lane, and I need to place it at a given offset from that DGN element. I can't remember what that should probably be. I'm just going to put 6 feet. I don't think that's right. This we'll get into detail in Chapter 6 on how to get these placed in here correctly. So there are exercises for all of these in the later chapters. This is just an introductory to talk about it, how these are set up. So I would place the offset, how far I want to place that particular cell from my DGN element, go to location. The location tab is set up so that I can tell it where do I want to place it. Do I want to use a MicroStation element, or do I want to use a chain for my GPK? Okay. If I use a DGN element, I have to use the Identify DGN Element button. So let's say I pick this one, and I want to start. How far off from the beginning do I start? And I think that's actually bigger, because you have to remember where the origin is. and make sure that you take into consideration that distance from that you need is required from here to where the cell starts to where that cell origin is. So I want to say that's probably like 35 or something. The buffer distance is an extra distance that it allows from that beginning point. So I could do this either way, using that buffer or not. And where does it need to end? I want it to go all the way to the end, but in this case, the last one has to be 15 feet right there. Okay, so I can put that buffer distance in here. And then how often do I want to place that particular cell or group of cells? I have a lot of different options. I can increment it, which will give it exactly from where it starts, every 100 feet. If I said even, then it would start and place it at every even 100 mark. So at 100 feet in, it would place one. At 200 feet in, it would place one. I can use the max spacing. Max spacing is what I would use for something like this, so that it places that spacing in here like it needs to be, but it maximizes it so that it makes it equidistant within that in there. It's kind of hard to explain exactly what it does, but it does what we need it to do in this case. So max spacing, or I can tell it to place it just once at the vertexes, so all the points. Maybe it's a chain, so at every point it will place one, or just at the ends. Okay, my endpoints of my element. Okay, so let's see what I get whenever we draw this. Angle, again, I can set the angle at 0. I can set it to relative or absolute. I can go in and change my justification. If I had more than one cell, am I justifying it based on the upstream cell, the first one, or the last one that I have in the feature group? Okay. I can also tell it, am I justifying these based on the origin of the cell, which could be anywhere, or at the edge of the cell, either where the upstream or downstream edges of that cell, I can place the justification. Okay, typically we leave that to justification center cell and origin. And then when I tell it to draw, see, I got them backwards. When I tell it to draw, some of this is based on the angle that you're in the file. As you get in here and you play with this tool, you'll figure out more on how it works and get the feel for it. Obviously, I didn't have the same dimensions in here as before, but notice that it's placing those 4 cells in here that I needed, and then I just select which side of that element that I want and accept it. This is an awesome tool to place for not just my arrows. I can place RPMs. Those are the 2 biggest ones, is arrows and RPMs. Bicycle markings, I can come in here and set up so that I've got the arrow, I've got the little man, and if I had like an only, but I can set that up so I can get my bicycle markings, so it'll place that group, however many, the increment of feet that I need along a project, just by grabbing, the bike lane line out here, and then tell it to place it, and it'll place it however often that you tell it on the location tab. Makes it a lot easier, a lot faster. So I hope that you'll use these tools. They're really beneficial. It can really help as you go through the next 4 chapters. These tools will be used heavily. Hopefully this chapter helps in giving you some basic knowledge for using them. Have a wonderful day and great week, and we'll see you next time.